Hello, friends. My name is Dustin, and I'm a pastor in Canton, Ohio.
And my name's Aleesa. I'm a licensed professional counselor also in Canton, Ohio.
And we're so excited that you're joining us for another one of our videos to give some tips to cultivate our own mental and spiritual health while here in quarantine. And one of the things that is the elephant in the room, so to speak, that we're all facing is feeling a lack of safety. We are in the middle of a global pandemic. Aleesa,
Mhm.
can you talk a little bit of how just having, a 180 in our day-to-day lives can make us feel as though we're in peril?
Yeah, so some of us have extra time on our hands, and others of us are being overwhelmed by extra responsibilities that we didn't have before. So, whatever camp of those you're in, you tend to seek information during this time. And frankly, there's not a lot of information available. The latest updates are we'll have to see, this could happen or this could happen. We're going to reopen the state or we're going to wait, and like the pros and cons of it all. So, having kind of that information overload, but in a sense, not a lot of information that's coming through it creates a lot of cognitive dissonance. No one's actually sure. Since our society as Americans tends to politicize everything, you don't really know exactly which voice you can trust a lot of the time. So that creates a sense of kind of turmoil, or where do I stand? Who's my loyalty to? And we're thinking all of this in the midst of like an actual life threatening pandemic. So it
Yeah.
gets really, really confusing.
Yeah, can you speak real quick to, I think one of the things that might be a really helpful tip is how much news should folks be taking in at any given time?
Right. So something that I found to help myself in my own life with my own anxiety, and that helps my clients too, is to implement what's called a worry time. So if you find yourself all day long checking and checking and checking, what could be the breaking news now? How are the numbers now? If this is something that's taking up a lot of your time, maybe tell yourself, okay, from 4 to 4:30 is going to be my research time. That's the half hour that I'm going to devote to worrying about this, to brainstorming about it, to looking up information about it, but it's only going to be in that half hour. So let's say it's noon and you start thinking and like, I need to check, I need more information. Say, all right, hold on though, that's for my worry time. That's going to be at 4. So I'm going to make a note of it, write it down, put that somewhere, save it in your phone or something. And then at 4, revisit it. And at that time, then see if it's important to you. You might find that after you table it for a couple of hours and you look at it at 4 p.m., it's not as important as you once thought. So something that could be like taking up hours and hours of your day is going to be something that you can be like, oh, like that's already fine. So regarding what sources to look at, I always try to look at middle of the road sources, especially when something gets politicized like this has. So I avoid, really far right or really far left sources. So if you look up something on Google, like they have these really nifty charts that show kind of a spectrum of which sources are on the far left. Like there you see the
Yeah,
Hill
yeah,
and stuff
yeah,
like that. And then like where the New York Times sits on that spectrum,
yeah.
where the Washington Post sits on the spectrum, things like that. So you can become a little more informed about where your news is coming from if you look at those kind of spectrums. And then also Snopes to me is always a really good source
Yeah,
because they're
yeah,
out to debunk all the
yeah,
internet
yeah.
lies and clickbait and stuff like that.
A second thing I think would be a helpful tip is just remembering and reminding ourselves. For a lot of us, it feels like we're unsafe. It feels like it's inevitable that we are going to get some horrific disease. We can start to go
Hmm.
to worst case scenario in our mind because we're in quarantine. But one of the things I think is helpful for me and has been incredibly helpful for a lot of folks is the fact that we need to remind ourselves that quarantining is giving ourselves safety. We might feel that we're shackled or held captive into our homes at this time, and we certainly see this by a lot of reaction from a lot of folks. But your house is not a prison in this time. For most of us, our home is actually a refuge. Now, I do want to point out that there are some folks who are stuck in isolation and can be feeling a lot of peril in that regard. There's also some folks that can be in their home with an abuser. Those situations are different. We're going to touch on that in a moment. But for the rest of us, if you're just feeling worried, if you're feeling that this is an impending doom, by practicing social distancing, by quarantining, by being at home, you actually are being proactive. You're not being passive. You actually are being proactive in keeping yourself or your family safe. Aleesa, can you speak to a bit of what we just mentioned, though, a moment ago, of what about if someone, first of all, is in a situation where they are potentially at risk for being abused?
If you are potentially at risk for being abused, you can call one of these numbers that we're putting on the screen now. You can call or text one of those hotlines. So the first one is for the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. A lot of people who aren't suicidal but who are in crisis tend to be wary of calling that because they're like, I don't want to take someone else's spot. I'm not actually suicidal, so why am I calling a suicide prevention hotline? But in all reality, those are crisis numbers. And the way the crisis workers look at situations are, if it's a crisis for the person who's calling, then it's a crisis for us. So they can help you talk through things. You know, maybe you do go to counseling and your counselor's not available because it's outside of office hours or something like that. Instead of being up all night worrying, you can call that number and talk through your problem with someone else. Those numbers are basically a listening ear for whatever you might need. So if you are in a domestic violence situation, you can call the domestic violence hotline, which is on the screen right now too. And they can give you resources or things to do to try to cool down the temperature where you're living. And, you know, even if you do call one number instead of the other one, they can kind of connect you to the person that can help you the most.
Yeah.
So don't be afraid to reach out for help, even with those numbers. Yeah, I understand. Oh, it's weird talking to a stranger about this, but it really does save lives. And it's something that you could also recommend to friends who do not feel safe during this time too, so that they can find some sort of peace and safety.
Yep. So that first number is 1-800-273-TALK. That's 1-800-273-8255. The next, if you prefer to text, is simply texting the word home to 741-741. Lastly, Aleesa, can you just give us a couple of practices? I know that human touch is something that instigates safety. Maybe there's a type of music. Can you speak to this? What are some tangible everyday practices that we can implement to remind ourselves that we are safe?
Yeah, so since we don't have access to a lot of information, or a lot of good information for that matter, something that you could do is, you know, kind of ask yourself, okay, what does make me feel safe? Is it a kind of music? Is it a TV show that you can watch over and over? Is it maybe having a different comforter on your bed? You know, kind of changing things up. Some people during this time have found it therapeutic to start taking care of a plant. Like a bonsai tree is always good for you to kind of like shape and do different things with. But kind of asking yourself, what do I need during this time? Sometimes it's sitting closer to someone that you live with, maybe sitting back to back. Maybe it's hugging or something. So obviously this is going to be different if you're with someone or if you live alone. So one of the things that I like to do is this kind of position. So you put your hands out, put your thumbs down, cross over. Yes, good. You didn't get tangled up
right now. This is great.
Yeah, so being in this position and kind of telling yourself, you know, even though I have this problem, I'm okay. I accept myself, you know, or some people, you know, in Christian circles might say, even though I have this problem, God is sovereign, God is in control, you know, and I'm okay. God has this, you know, I've got this, you know, whatever kind of phrase you want to tell yourself to evoke some sort of sense of calm, and just repeating that to yourself over and over. But like that position, it makes us feel like we're being swaddled or hugged, like even if you are by yourself. So that's something just like quick that you might be able to implement if you're starting to feel like everything's washed out from under you.
That's great. Well, thank you, Aleesa, for sharing those tips. I know that it's helpful for me to hear, and for our friends who are watching, I'm sure it is as well. We hope this video was helpful for you, and we'll see you next time.